As the #1 Jalter stan on the planet, if you thought that I was not going to take this time to glaze up Jalter when she gets a rerun over here on the NA side of things, then I guess you'd be wrong, and this video is here to prove you wrong. And she's in a bit of an interesting position over here on the NA side of things because she is about 2 years off from getting a really strong buff on her 3rd skill, but that doesn't mean that she's unusable over here on the NA side of things. I mean, even still to this day over on the JP version of the game, she has the 2nd highest damage among all single target NPs if we're not taking power mods into account. So when it comes to free damage, I mean, she's basically the queen. And she pairs really nicely with Koyenskaya of Light, not only getting the additional buster buff and the star weight on those buster cards, but if Jalter wasn't already refunding her NP easy enough as is, she can now refund from her buster cards. And Koyenskaya offers her double power mods, gives her more access to immediate stars if it wasn't already easy enough for her to get, and then also just throws her big fat batteries and also refunds all of her skills as well. And if it ever does come to it, she can refund Jalter's NP on her own NP, so that's always really fun. There's also a certain appeal to Jalter's style of gameplay. I think it's why she still stays popular to this day, because she just does a lot of damage. She just hits really, really hard and is very easy to use. Think of somebody like Saber Lancelot, right? How you just kind of can tap all 3 of his skills and just go to work. Sure, he's not the most broken single target Saber we have. I mean, we've got Dioscurry, the Trung sisters, even Benny Enma, right, that are way better than he is. But there's an appeal to just being like, man, I don't even want to think about what the servant is doing. Let me just rip and tear through these guys. So we're going to talk about Jalter in today's video for more of my new players, but also if you're a veteran player, maybe you can glean something from this video, as your boy's a little bit of a Jalter enthusiast and a Jalter expert himself. So strap in, get comfortable, and if you'd be so inclined to leave a like on the video and maybe even subscribe to the channel, as it is absolutely free and helps me out more than you know. But enough shilling out for the video, let's start diving into her kit, starting off with her hits. And yes, unfortunately, she is a very early servant for FGO, so her hits are not exactly the best, except, and this is how you know that she is betrothed to me alone, she has not the 5, not the 6, but the 7-hit extra attack. And if you are a new player, you may be wondering, ZTL, what is the extra attack? Well, let me just let you know right now that it's a composite card that gen stars NP and does big boy damage, and with the advent of a pen skill is giving you a further boost to your extra attack. It is now risen to omnipotent status. It is completely unstoppable if you have the servant coins to spare going for that extra attack buff, but obviously don't do that unless you have the coins to spare. It's probably better to go for the mono loading to get that 20% starting gauge, as it's going to be more helpful going into boss fights, and when she gets her buff later on in the future, it does make her kind of good going into 90++ nodes as a single target guy that can just chunk large enemies. But realistically, her other cards are really not all that much to be concerned about. They've got very low hits on them. And realistically, the only thing that you actually care about are the fact that she just has cards to crit the enemy into oblivion. Now, one thing, if this is your first Avenger class servant, something you got to look at are her passive skills, because Avenger B is a passive skill that basically says if a gust of wind comes Jalter's way, she's going to refund a butt ton of NP. So if you notice that she gets smacked and then refunds like 20% of her NP back, that's because of the Avenger passive. Oblivion Correction gives her a free additional 10% crit damage, which is only going to age even better when we get the new append skills that give you a free 30% crit damage. So you're just stacking up and racking all this free crit damage, and it starts with Oblivion Correction. And then she also just, for whatever reason, gives herself 4% NP every single turn. So if she wasn't refunding enough on Avenger, through her natural Brave Chains, through Koyenskaya and the buff that she now recently got, just also take it. You know, here, just 4% NP every single turn for literally doing nothing. But now we're going to start moving into some of her skills. And like I said, her skills are very good, but very simple, which is what I think the appeal of Jalter is. Starting off with the first skill over here, you actually hear me refer to this when I talk about somebody like BB. I say she has the Jalter skill, which is a 50% crit damage buff for 3 turns and a pretty decent amount of star weight for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, meaning this skill is going to be up more than it is down, as you're up for 3 turns and only down for 2 before the cooldown resets. And let me tell you, when you have the highest attack stat in the game, 50% crit damage really does go a long way. I mean, as you're going to be seeing in the background, I'm pretty much just taking Jalter to various stages and just letting her crit people, just not even caring, just obliterate these guys, take them out. And the numbers get pretty ridiculous. Now, obviously, some of these I'm using double Koyan Sky to refund and loop her skills, but not for all of them, right? Not all of these ones am I going for like the Atlas Academy, loop all the skills twice to give her 100% crit damage. Sometimes she's just got the 50%, and sometimes that is just enough. My view on crit damage is that at a certain point, it does just kind of become like, oh, well, let's just see how much crit damage I can actually do. Where's the milestone? You can almost think of it as like the Super Orion problem, right? Where at a certain point, the enemy only has 300k HP. Super Orion is doing like 1 million crits, which is kind of just there to be really flashy. It's like, okay, realistically, we didn't need to do all that damage, but it feels really cool in doing that, and that's something that Jalter can provide for you. And she can do this on all of her cards because it's just free big crit damage, and she just has really big natural attack. Bumping on over to the second skill, this is one that I think kind of got fudged up a little bit because it's a party-wide attack buff, which does help her out by giving herself 20% attack, but then she further boosts the attack of dragon allies by 20% for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. So again, it's going to be up longer than it's down, but unfortunately, despite being the dragon witch, she herself does not have the dragon trait. One of the things that I think they could do for Jalter in the future, if they wanted to give her just a little bit of a slight buff, is have her gain the ability to give herself the dragon trait. And then I mean, she's basically giving herself a 40% attack buff that buffs her damage, and that's pretty much the only thing you're doing with Jalter. So it's a minor way they could go ahead and buff her skill set without really doing anything, but at least for now, you could maybe use her in some funny team comms. I believe Salter also has the dragon trait, so you could kind of do like a Shinjuku pairing where you're like, all right, let me just take Salter and Jalter, throw them together, and look at that, there's some mild synergy, I suppose. But realistically, you're not going to be seeing that second charisma ever proc unless you're going out of your way to realistically proc it. Just treat this as an attack buff. Whenever you see it available, you click it and you just start attacking people. The third skill is where these things get a little bit interesting because right now it's a 50% buster buff for a turn and it's 1 turn of invincibility that also does 1,000 damage to yourself as a demerit, but do not worry. When she came out, people thought this was an actual demerit on her, but they just didn't realize that when the enemy is paced, dealing 1,000 damage to yourself is nothing. We also had Merlin at the time, which was even more confusing because Merlin just offsets the damage you take from the skill, and who has ever really lost a mission because of 1,000 damage? I'm sure it's like 1 in 1,000 chance. So realistically, demerit, no demerit. It doesn't really matter because you're also not taking any more damage for the rest of that turn. You have the invincibility up. But in the future, this is going to become a 50% battery for her, which is why she gets really good going into 90++ nodes, especially in multi-core setups. Because you're usually using somebody like Castoria somewhere in your multi-core setups, and this means that with the 50% battery and going for her mono-loading a pen skill, she'll have a 70% battery. She only needs 1 Castoria charisma to realistically fire her NP, and she does a butt ton of damage, so you really don't have to worry about her not doing enough to obliterate the enemy. So it makes her very versatile, not just going into boss fights where she can obliterate people, but also she can be used in 90++ content, or even 90+ if you have some mats in the 90+ that you specifically want to go after. Regardless, she'll be really good at helping you out with that. And gaining some kind of niches like that is just always very useful to have. I mean, look at somebody like Kentoki, who really doesn't have a place going into challenge quests, but is maintaining relevancy because he hits really hard, has a big battery, and that is super useful going into 90+ and 90++ content. So Jalter gaining that ability, that little bit of technique there to pivot into farming style content really helps her stay relevant. Then finally there's her NP, which is just absolutely disgusting. This is pretty much what allows her to just take down Qi Shi Huang by herself, because for one, it's a buffed NP, so it's doing more damage than it was doing normally. She has the curse status on there, so if you ever need her to take on some like high damage reduction enemies, you know, like we had the crab challenge quest a couple of years back, stuff along those lines. If you ever need to take out something like that, she can be useful for that, but realistically, you're using it for the damage. The 30 stars, yeah, you heard me right, 30 stars that she's going to bomb, which pairs very nicely with that first skill of hers being able to do some really big crit damage and absorbing those stars, and the buff block. The buff block is super insane. You slap this on an enemy and it pretty much denies all of their buffs, at least for that one instance, but some buffs are treated as all being tied together into like one big buff, and so you kind of just negate the entire thing, which makes her super good in going into the Qi Shi Huang fight. She can still get butt blasted by like some really big crits that he can do, but if you're doing a good job at denying those crits and denying his buffs, she can absolutely solo stomp that fight. She can also really just kind of stomp the Zeus fight as well. She can just go in there and just rip and tear through that guy, which is a bit more useful because I believe for that one, you do have the force support of Romulus, so having your own Avenger to take that guy out is really strong. But I don't want anybody to summon on Jalter specifically to take out the Zeus fight. If you really put some elbow grease into it, you can use the Romulus given to beat that Zeus fight, right? He's actually strong enough to get the job done. You just gotta put a little bit of elbow grease into it, but it is possible. I guess I'll also go ahead and mention her Bond CE just because, you know, I'm a huge Jean and Jalter simp. Might as well go ahead and mention this. She gives 15% Buster performance to the entire party. No, this is not really one of those Bond CEs that you're really going to be pursuing, but if you do want to get one of her append skills, you are going to get this eventually, as you are going to need to bond up your Jalter pretty high if you have her at NP1 and want to start dipping into some of those append skills. So make sure that you're doing all that. And I mean, you can take it out for a spin, it's fine. Like giving everybody 15% free Buster damage, I mean, who's going to complain about that? But realistically, you're probably just going to slap like Black Grail or Cranking even on, or just something that's going to do a little bit more. Aerial Drive also really works well. There's also the Jalter Drinking CE that I believe is going to be coming back into the shop, next year? I think that's when they're going to start adding some of those older event CEs back, so that also works really nicely with her. But overall, yeah, just a phenomenal servant. Like, she is super, super fun to use. I think if we're talking in terms of viability, I think she's a solid A tier right now on the NA version of things. I think she might be able to potentially punch up into S tier over on JP. It's kind of hard to tell right now, because she does have a lot of competition, especially with Kentoki being super effective against everybody as a Berserker, and she's an Avenger, so she's hitting a lot of guys for neutral. But at the very least, you can always be confident that at the lowest, Jalter is going to fall to like an A tier, and will always sit from there to A+, which is just good for a servant. It means that servant has a very good lifespan. It's just always generally going to be good, which is surprising for a servant that has only received 2 buffs and came out during, like, what, the end of year 1 or something along those lines when we had the Da Vinci Lotto event. So yeah, like, a servant being that old and retaining that level of value is kind of insane. I mean, it's almost like akin to something like Kama or something, where they came out such a long time ago, yet they are retaining value. But let me know if you're going to be summoning for Jalter in the comment section down below. I will try to donate some of my Jalter simping powers over to you guys to hopefully allow you guys to get another copy of her. I'm still debating as to whether or not I want to chuck a multi at Jalter, because every time she comes around, I chuck a couple of multis at her and she gives me an extra copy. So I'm slowly building up to that free NP5. You know, I'm not trying to spend any money, because I absolutely despise spending money on mobile games, but hey, if she's going to come to me for free with a little bit of free Saint Quartz I've got, then by golly, I'm not going to say no. But with all that being said, it's down in the description down below if you want to see me go live. I go live. I'm trying to do every weekday over on my Twitch, which is in the description down below. Tuesdays, Thursdays are probably going to be other non-FGO related games like Arknights and Zenless Zone Zero, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday are going to be the FGO days. If you want to go that extra mile in supporting the channel and get access to some super secret channels in the Discord, we also have the Patreon down there linked in the description down below, but just liking and subscribing and watching the video is more than enough. It's just there for people who want to go that extra mile. And finally, the Discord link should be fixed, so if you want to join the Discord, that should also be down in the description down below. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace, late guys.